Good morning.
Good morning.
All right. Thank you, Russell. 1764, 1968, 1975, 1985, 2013, 2016. 6 of many dates etched in the history of the Black experience at Brown. I have the privilege of serving as chair of the Ad Hoc Corporation Committee on Diversity and Inclusion. Our charge is to review and monitor progress on the implementation of action areas outlined by the DIAP with the focus on accountability of responsible units. Today, I have the privilege of moderating this plenary session panel. Now, starting at 8:30 on a Saturday is not a random event. However, we hope that this discussion will provide important context to the topics that will be discussed around campus today and when you leave campus. We hope that it will provide some insight into the best practices and areas of attention regarding the DIAP. So let's begin. And I hope Rick, Tricia, and Shontay don't mind me calling them Rick, Tricia, and Shontay. Awesome. Rick, I'm going to start with you. There have been 2 annual reports since the adoption of DIAP. Can you highlight some of the progress made and some of the challenges that we still face?
Sure. Thanks, Jeff, for moderating the panel. Thank you all for coming out early on a Saturday morning to be here and for all that you've done to help us kind of move in the right direction. I would say that, let's start with the positives. What have been the kind of progress points? I think the first one is just the way that we're having conversations about racial diversity and inclusion and climate on campus. These are conversations that happened all the time for a long, long time, but they happened in certain kinds of pockets. Right now, they're happening everywhere. And I think there's a reframing of the issue so that it's not just talking about what we should be doing and how we should be doing it, but really bringing to the fore that this is the right thing to do, and it's also the smart thing for Brown University to do. If we're going to be known as the university that attracts the best and brightest from all walks of life, then we have to actually walk the talk. We have to make sure that we're recruiting and also supporting people when they're here so that it becomes kind of a self-reinforcing cycle. And I think that's a big step, at least in the 5 years that I've been here. Other elements of progress, I think, sort of faculty recruitment. Before the February 2016 launch of the DIAP, if you look at the recruitment over time of faculty from historically underrepresented groups, it's usually in the single digits. Since the plan, we've been on average, 1 year it was 31%, another year was 40%. I haven't seen all the numbers. I saw just from the Dean of the Faculty area, it seems to be about a quarter, but we haven't brought in the School of Public Health and the Biomed area. But you've seen a dramatic change in terms of the recruiting of faculty from historically underrepresented groups. The same thing for graduate students. That was another area that was really a weak area for this university, but for all universities. If you want to actually diversify the academy, you actually have to build the pipeline, and that's graduate students is one big important part of that. And what we saw as a result, again, of the DIAP is that the entering graduate student class, 20% of them self-identify as historically underrepresented group, belonging to historically underrepresented groups. That's completely different from before the DIAP. Another, I think, important, so it's not just the numbers and changing the compositional diversity, I think it's also issues of programming. If you actually look at what's going on campus, in centers like the CSREA or the CSSJ, across different departments, et cetera, you see a lot more activity. in terms of having conversations, courses, research, speakers, series, et cetera, focusing on issues of racial justice, diversity, ethnicity, et cetera. And that's great, because we want to play an intellectual leadership role on this campus in these areas. And I think, as I said at the beginning, the level of conversations. One of the innovations of this, and I like that you mentioned all these different dates, because it's not the first wave of efforts to try to diversify. Brown University, when we were building the plan, we went and read all the past plans. Great plans, really good intentions. Somehow they didn't quite deliver. And we wanted to try to understand how can this time we deliver. And so the theory of change in the plan is it can't just be something that University Hall declares, hoping that people sort of achieve it, then some other thing will happen and we lose focus. The idea was that it had to be embedded in everything we do. And so therefore what we asked, demanded, was that every single department, academic department and administrative department, had to develop their own diversity inclusion action plan. What are they going to do so that they could fulfill these goals? Those plans were discussed in the department, so therefore you're having these kinds of conversations. And everything is now posted on websites that people can check to say, this is what you said you're going to do, here's the annual update, here's the second annual update, how are we doing? So that kind of accountability, transparency, and kind of grounded conversation, I think, is what's really begun to change help us bring about change here on campus. So there's a lot of really great things, and I'm sure you'll hear more. Let me talk about the challenge.
Please.
And what I see as the real challenge is it's really hard to change the culture and the sort of routinized policies and practices of a university that's over 250 years old. And so what I worry about is that while we're making these big pushes in academic programming and attracting amazing students and staff and faculty to the university, that still in these basic building blocks, in the departments, sometimes in the labs, in the playing fields, et cetera, that the same kind of stupid stuff keeps on happening. And as a result, it kind of undermines, I think, the feeling that you are really welcome, we really are serious inclusion. And I think that takes a lot of work, a lot of education, a lot of attention, et cetera. So what I worry about is we're making progress on certain areas, we're struggling on others, and that mismatch, I think, is a real issue. And so I think a number of us have been trying to figure out how do we focus more on those kind of organizational processes, practices, cultural issues. And if we can sort of crack that nut, then I think we will really soar as a university.
That's a very interesting point, and it's a perfect segue to the question that I want to ask Tricia, this whole aspect of managing expectations. So Tricia, specifically, you have been quoted as stating that the work of confronting and combating racism and advancing the goals of the DIAP is a marathon and not a sprint. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yes. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. How are we doing? This is too early for me to be out in public, so if it takes me a little while to get warmed up, that is the reason. I had to have my coffee at 6:30 just to be here. Thank you, Jeff, for that question. I do remember this quote, and it's really important because what has been the case, not just at Brown, but everywhere, is that usually there's some reason that the things like the Diversity in Action Plan are instituted, and it's usually student activism. And student activism creates a context of urgency, which is critical. You need an urgent push. Students have been important across the board. Alumni have been important across the board. But what has tended to happen around the country is that we respond to the urgency with a quick fix. Oh, let's throw X number of dollars at the situation, and then that means we're committed and we're all done. And then we end up back here. That's why those dates matter so much. But what's different this time is that we're interested here not just in the urgency, which is the immediacy of making change, but really treating it like a marathon. which is to say you've got to both pace yourself, stay on tempo, but realize you're not going to change all of this overnight. And it's not going to happen just by throwing money at it. So it's the tempo and the long distance run nature of it is not about slowing down the agenda, right? But it's about knowing that we'll be at this a long time. And that really gets to this question of changing the culture. It isn't just about getting bodies in places. It's about changing the institutional practices that have created homogeneity and exclusion. So when we think about diversity and inclusion, we should really flip that question to say, well, how did we create as a nation, not just Brown in any way, homogeneity and exclusion? What were the practices that created that as a silent norm, not as, a meritocracy as we often think, right? And that these are exceptional additions to an existing merit-based situation. So once we ask that question, now we have to drill down. What are the day-to-day practices? What are the hiring practices? What are the climate components? And that's where the marathon really kicks in.
Thank you. There are, however, those urgent issues that come up regularly. And I want to direct this question to you, Shontay. Specifically, we've seen things that have happened over the past 18 months. The incident in Virginia with members of the alt-right coming and marching on University of Virginia. And then there was an incident on campus where there were some racist flyers on the streets running through campus last spring. So there are some urgent issues that come up. Can you talk about how that specifically plays out on campus, Shontay?
Yeah. First, let me start by saying that it's an honor to be here. As a Black woman, as a cabinet member here at Brown, I wouldn't be in this seat if it were not for you all and the work that you've forged ahead over many, many years. And so, again, those dates are really important. I have a particular lens. And the way in which I think about this and the question that you posed, Jeff, really is the juxtaposition of being an organizational leader and a Black mother, right? And there's constantly a balance for institutions as organizations responsible for individual people's experiences. Critical race theory posits that racism is normal in the United States. Right? And so as an organization, how do we continually remember the normalcy around racism? I have to think about being an advisor at a senior level while also thinking about the student who walked on campus for the first time in 1955, having just seen the Jet magazine cover of Emmett Till. And all of a sudden now, they're a student at Brown, right? Maybe feeling lost, isolated, confused, scared. I have to think about the student who came to Brown on the heels of Philando Castile, right? Having watched live on Facebook in 2016 the death and murder of a Black man. And so we, as organizations, I think what we are grappling with is making sure that we have, obviously, the most outstanding academic experience for our students, and so also remembering that there are lived experiences that the students and faculty and staff, for that matter, are having that impact their daily lives. And so the ways in which we are working diligently to address those in the specific examples that you gave is kind of remembering students share information at the speed of light. The time it takes for an administration to huddle, to discuss it, it's been spread across the country and the world, right? And so I think the work really happens in building trust, and using the existing places, the student centers, and other places across campus to continue to build that trust so that students know while our communication may not be as fast, we're talking about it, and then we have to respond. So that's, and when we don't respond in a way that is immediate enough, we have to own that. And we have to own what that impact is on the community. And so with the racist flyer incident, that's exactly what we did. A statement did come out. It was very clear that that was against the values of the institution, and that we could have responded quicker, and we acknowledge that. And so knowing those, having those experiences as an administration helps us to respond to the next one faster, better, with more intention. And so, and really connecting our community members to the resources. There's proactive leadership and reactive leadership. There will always be times when we have to respond, but we need to also be thinking constantly about, again, racism is normal. And so could there potentially be another racist flyer? Yes. And so knowing and having a communication plan to address those, not when it happens, but knowing that the potential is always there.
Thank you, Shontay. I want to go back to something Rick mentioned about the successes that we had in recruiting faculty. Clearly, back in 1968, that was a concern of the folks who walked out here. Certainly, when you look carefully and do a deep dive into the faculty who have been recruited, many of them are junior faculty, and that's awesome. There have been some significant gains made in senior faculty, but many of these folks are junior faculty. So what's the strategy to move these junior faculty through the ranks of tenure so that they stay here, don't reach glass ceilings? And I'd like to get the opinion of the three of you about real strategies that we have to mentor, to sponsor, and to move those junior faculty through the ranks here at Brown. Rick, I'll start with you.
So there's different strategies, and I think in terms of the recruitment, we've been very successful with junior. We've actually been quite successful with the seniors as well. But what you want to do is not play musical chairs across the universities. What you want to really do is build the pipeline and build the pool. And I think it's really important, and this touches on what Tricia said earlier. It's not just like, okay, we made a commitment, we check off that box, everything's okay. What we're trying to build is a set of processes in how we recruit and mentor faculty, which will be part of our institutional practice, so that we'll always do this, as opposed to that we're responding to some immediate challenge. I think specifically for juniors, what we've tried to do is build in very serious mentoring, having senior people with the junior people, and just to make sure that they are on track with their teaching, on track with their research, that they are going to the right kinds of conferences, getting grants. There is a Faculty of Color network that was formed. It was self-formed and supported by us, but it was self-formed, and they are also supporting one another. We have a lot of other programming that we're doing, and we're very, very attentive. I mean, one of the things that goes on here at Brown, which is really great, and this is something that Kevin McLaughlin, the Dean of the Faculty, has really taken, who's over there, who's done a really great job, is every single year, every junior faculty member is reviewed by their department. And those reviews go to the Dean of the Faculty, and the Dean of Faculty is actually carefully watching to make sure, are we giving the kinds of resources we need to these faculty, especially given that since the numbers are still small and they get asked to do so many other things in addition to their teaching and research, we don't want to overburden them. And so Kevin and the Dean of the Faculty and the other deans have been very, very attentive to provide those kinds of supports.
Tricia, your feelings on it?
Yeah, I had a couple of those items. Luckily, I have a few others to add here. Another thing beside the Faculty of Color Network and deep attention is cluster hiring, which is a process by which you don't think you're just going to hire one person in one area, but you try to think about hiring people in a related set of areas who are able to work together and support each other and create intellectual and social community. So it's not just one here, one there, but a cluster, and a cluster. And this creates a kind of protective mechanism that generates itself. But another thing that's very important is open lines of communication. Rick, President Paxson, and Kevin McLaughlin, the Dean of the Faculty, have been exceptionally receptive to concerns as they show up. Now, I've been at Brown for, 12 years or so, and I did my PhD here back in the 80s and 90s, late 80s, early 90s, and I've been at many other places, and I have never seen this level of responsiveness. The level of horizontal access is extraordinary, and it's a big thing because what it means is that, first of all, it takes what it means to be like, why would you think a university would even listen? I mean, as a faculty member, you have to overcome this feeling that what's the point? So it's taken a little bit of time, but people believe now, hey, if I call my chair and if my chair is not responsive, I can go to Shontay, I can go to Rick, I can go to Kevin, I can go to Paxton and get, like they'll listen, my goodness. So of course it makes you behave responsibly, bring only the really important stuff, but it's going to be dealt with. So that open line of communication is a top-down, bottom-up, two-way commitment that's exceptionally important. And then the last thing is that departments are an amazing part of academic culture because it produces a certain level of excellence and specificity, but the structure can become a series of mini fiefdoms. It's sort of just the way it's built. So people think, they're chair of a department, and they're the chair, and they're the boss, and they know what's good for everybody. And so, you kind of have to, I've been a chair, I remember that fictitious feeling. I was the boss of nothing, I just want you to know. But what's important here is to honor the expertise, but to challenge the administrative presumptions that go along with that intellectual expertise. So there's been a tremendous capacity to say, okay, so what does it mean to mentor a junior woman of color scientist in a STEM field that hasn't seen a junior woman of color ever? Right? What does that mean? It doesn't mean you can do the same thing. And having the culture change and the research change that makes that kind of conversation possible really breaks up the downside of a certain kind of departmentalized culture. So those are a few other ways that I think, Jeff, we've really transformed things.
Let's go a little deeper into that, though, because usually the on-ramp for many of these junior faculty is the department chair. So how do you affect culture? How do you affect the thinking of that department chair in this whole aspect of DIAP and culture change?
Well, the DIAPs, because we don't have enough acronyms, the D in front of the DIAP are the department DIAPs, and Rick mentioned this, but this is very important. So normally, departments put in proposals for new hires to replace people for expansion every year, and the dean of the faculty's office, and that is, Kevin in this case, reviews those requests based on growth, based on needs, based on the budget, based on all kinds of things I don't know anything about. But what it also means now is that they have to explain it in relation to their DIAP. That is to say, DIAP is not a secondary or tertiary goal. It's a primary goal as a part of your department's vision. So you have to be able to say, what are you doing to meet the goals of your DIAP, your department-based DIAP? Do you need more junior faculty of color? What particular areas of research? Those things are now wedded, as opposed to saying, we want someone who does this area of research, and if we get lucky, we're hoping to get a person of color or a historically underrepresented group member. Now the question is simultaneous. And by elevating it, it makes it much, much harder for that kind of culture to retain itself. So you have to basically be responsive. So that's just one, there are many things, but that's one of the key ways that happens.
Good. I want to ask Shontay a question in that vein as well, too. Part of the charge of your office, Shontay, is to provide professional development, training for faculty and staff, and many community building events. So what kind of opportunities have you found in the couple of years or year that you've been here that have been most successful, and where are the needs?
That would definitely be in unconscious bias training. And I think, again, not thinking of it as one-offs, but thinking about the whole experience for particularly, we'll use early career faculty as an example. And so we can go into departments, we meet with chairs and directors, and most recently I did a workshop, because faculty don't use the word training all the time. So a workshop, which is fine, with the tenure and promotion committee, right? And so this is a really important committee on campus that's often not thought about in these conversations as it pertains to people's experience moving through the institution and ultimately getting tenure. And so what we do is make sure we put our resources in every single aspect of the institution so that diversity is centered. It's not, again, an additional thing that people are required to do. You have to couple those trainings and workshops with on-the-ground support for the faculty. And so we're members of the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity, right? And so when I have junior faculty approach me and say, I need to stay on my tenure clock and I need help with my writing, what resources are there? We can help with those things. And so we've supported a number of junior faculty, particularly those from historically underrepresented groups, with those types of resources. And so it's a balance of the professional development resources and then the ongoing trainings around how does unconscious bias permeate the organization at every level, and how do we dismantle and disrupt that?
Thank you. Certainly in this audience, I would be remiss if I didn't ask the question of each of you as how, as we as a group of alumni, can help you in these efforts. And I want to start with Tricia this time with this question.
Wow, they didn't give me a chance to think about that one. Well, I mean, first of all, you can continue to be both the critics and the supporters that you have been. Both of these things are exceptionally important, right? Because just being a booster doesn't help us grow, but just being a naysayer doesn't help us automatically implement and grow either, right? But that balance of critical engagement, challenge when we make mistakes, pushing us forward, and at the same time, being supportive of Brown is very important. I think that, we often think of alumni coming back to support the current students because that's the core of our relationship to the university is as former students in all of your cases, but also to really attend to the students who are here. But I would say, really seeing the junior faculty as another constituency to nurture and to relate to connect to have a sense of connection to. It's a little bit harder to imagine what that role might be, but I think that's an important place for alumni to be involved and to share how important what we're doing is. I mean, I've said this in many, many places, so I'll repeat it here. It takes a lot. I never saw myself as someone who would defend an institution because my whole entire career was about arguing against them. And pretty much, I was like, well, what's a good institution? I'm like, I don't know one, But I have to say that the level of work and commitment that's going on here is not something I've ever seen before. And it's not just encouraging, it's building a foundation. So we need to defend Brown in public, right? There's a lot of attacks. It's not random, in my opinion, right? The level of negative attention we get for teeny tiny things and the limited positive attention we get, in my opinion, limited, not adequate, for the extraordinary things we do. So being the targeted boosters when it really matters, when there's a certain kind of critical and imbalanced way, and being the kinds of supporters of our students and our junior faculty. That's what I would recommend.
Thank you. Shontay?
I'm going to echo something I heard Sergio mention yesterday, being ambassadors and a voice. Understanding the history, the only way that we can help prevent things from reoccurring in the same exact way is to continuously understand the history. And so from my particular lens in my office, always being in tune with what you experienced as a student and how that is different or unfortunately sometimes the same for current students and the why. And so continuously helping us grapple with the why so that we can continue to make progress moving forward. I think a very specific thing that I've been thinking about recently is understanding the different systems within an organization. And so tenure, again, being one of them. And when I'm meeting with new students, whether they're seniors or new students, we focus on compositional diversity as we should because that's an important part of making sure that the community is diverse and growing. Moving that now to interactional diversity, so the ways in which we have meaningful interactions on a daily basis, and then never forgetting about the structural components of that. And so again, as alum, I think you can really help with those last two, the interactional diversity as well as the structural. So understanding the history of Brown, all those important dates that we mentioned in the beginning, and then all those future to come. And so how do we make sure the community understands as we bring in more faculty from historically underrepresented groups that there's a certain level of invisible labor that we have to understand that they experience, and that as you reach back and engage with current students, helping the current students also think about all the tenets of an organization. right? We want the composition, but we don't want to get stuck there. And so sometimes current students need to hear from alum a broader sense of what an organization is and how it functions. And so you really could be a partner in that work.
Thank you, Shontay. Rick?
This echoes a question that I think early on when we were planning this weekend, the IPC, I was on a call with them, and they said, how can we support you? And I'm like, keep doing what you're doing, which is support us with your time and your talent and your insights and your advice, and keep the pressure on, because organizational, institutional change is really hard. And it changes because of, not just because, sometimes because people have, goodwill and they want to change things, but also because there's pressure to change. And I think sort of balancing those two things is really important because of accountability. And the accountability isn't just about the individuals. I think it's important. Right now, things are lined up pretty nicely. There's good people in place. We have a wonderful president with great leadership. We have built a lot of programs. We're making changes. But what we have to do is institutionalize it, because people come and go. And so what we have to do is make sure that, do we have in place a way of hiring people that will never change? Do we have in place a series of processes that will support junior people so that it's here and it will never go? Do we have things in place so that we change the culture slowly but surely, et cetera? And those kinds of systems and processes in place is what we're trying to build. And we need you all to not only help us build those, but hold us accountable to make sure we're building them for the future.
Thank you, Rick. Doing this work is very labor intensive. I think everyone in this room would admit to that, and certainly the people on this stage would know that this is very labor intensive work, requires annual follow-up and development for each of you. We've all heard of fatigue in this field. Do you worry about burnout? Do you worry about checking the box and moving on? Tell me your thoughts on that. Shontay, I'll start with you.
Sure. Fatigue in diversity work, I think, is born out of the ways in which we engage with the language around the work. And so I think a big part of the work that we do is helping people to not talk about it as an add-on. The minute that you say, I have to do this additional thing, your brain will process that as more on top of all the other work that you have to do. And so if you ask any department or student, do you care about academic excellence and innovation, they're here at Brown, they will say yes. So I, in response, say, then you care about diversity, because you can't have those things without diversity. And so we're changing the way in which we engage on the topic and not having people think and talk about it in a way that's an add-on.
Thank you. Tricia, burnout and fatigue.
Yeah. That was a really nice pep talk there. Well, the problem with burnout and fatigue is feeling like you're pushing the rock up the same hill that you pushed, the people who are gone, who are ancestors who pushed. It's not just the work, it's the feeling that you're doing the work over and over and over again, right? That's where the fatigue comes from. Nobody works harder, than black people, in my opinion. It's not about the hard work, it's about repeating the same work. It's like washing dishes. I have to do this every day. It's the same thing. So this is why, the DIAP being part of the campaign is so important, because there are very few places that are institutionalizing the resources for, hiring, for places like the Center for the Study of Race and Ethnicity. My fatigue comes from thinking that 10 years from now, the person behind me will start over again, and I can't make that not happen. That's where my fatigue comes from. So that goes back to another role we can play to really support this effort, because really making it, endowing places means the university has to carry it forward. It won't be a decision that gets made by some yet unknown leader in some unknown future who says, oh, we fixed that problem, check, because they don't understand Shontay's point. So that's really, that's a place we can prevent the legacy of that fatigue, I think, in an important way.
Awesome. And Rick, just to finish us up, talk about ways to continue the momentum as we move forward and to hopefully avoid some of that burnout and fatigue.
I mean, I think as both Shontay and Tricia, Shontay more politely, Tricia more bluntly, there is burnout. This is hard work, not just because it's over and over again, but it's just hard work to change an organization and change a culture, et cetera. And I think what we're trying to do is distribute that work. Right? So that it's not just Shontay's office, or it's not just a couple centers, or it's not just a small group of faculty of color or students of color doing this work, but all of us have to do, because as Shontay said, it's part of our mission of being an excellent institution. Those two things go hand in hand. And so part of what we're trying to do is distribute that work. And the second thing I think that's important is to celebrate, right? It is hard work. But I think, for me, the first faculty meeting of every year, all the new faculty, come and they stand up. Most faculty meetings, faculty don't come. They try, only a small group come. We don't even call a quorum because we're afraid to. But at the first meeting, people come. And what you have is, the deans call out their names and then they stand up. And, 5 years ago when I came and stood up, the vast majority of people look like me. Now, when you go to a faculty meeting and the beginning of the year and they stand up, it's a different world. And that gives you joy. You feel the energy and enthusiasm, et cetera. So I think making sure that we are experiencing the joy and celebration of what's happening and not just see it as a burden, that's, I think, a really important thing to do.
Thank you. Please, everyone, help me thank our three panelists this morning. Thank you. Thank you. To be respectful of the next part of the plenary session, we're going to exit. But again, I think we have our marching orders too, as well as alumni, is we need to continue to partner with our alma mater, not only into keeping them accountable, but to help engage in this strong work with our time, our talent, and our treasure. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.